So this is an update, a meandering ramble. We are closing in on 1 year since we were told to lock down for 2 weeks to flatten the curve so as not to overwhelm our healthcare systems. Nearing 1 year. I remember in February when news of the outbreak initially hit in China, and we started seeing videos coming out of China that most people found shocking. I think I'm not going out on a limb to say that. People being unwillingly hauled off to detention centers, medical facilities, we don't know. People being locked into their apartments, having their doors blowtorched shut so they couldn't escape. Massive cars parading down the streets, spraying some form of chemical spray to disinfect the streets of China.
抓起来了。
哦，进去了，看到没有？
他们我不喜欢抓进去。
可是他们生病了。
A Wuhan hospital is sending coronavirus patients for cremation while they're still alive. That's according to a woman in a video that's circulating on social media. Speaking in a Wuhan dialect, the woman describes how she witnessed the patient next door being sealed up in body bags.
And we were watching these videos in North America. I think a great many of us were in shock. We're saying, thank goodness, at the very least, this can't happen in North America and Canada. Then a few weeks later, when the pandemic started going global, we were told we have to lock down for 2 weeks to flatten the curve so as not to overwhelm our hospital systems, our healthcare systems. That was March last year, and 1 year later, we are now under curfew, where we're not allowed out of our homes between 8 in the evening and 5 in the morning, at least in Quebec.
From this Saturday, these streets in the northeastern town of Nancy should be empty after 6 p.m.
Pour moi, c'est ridicule. Que ce soit 18h ou 20h, ça va rien changer. Au contraire, ça va forcer les gens à aller plus sur la même plage horaire dans les commerces, tout ça.
The new 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. curfew will apply in these 15 northeastern and southeastern departments, where coronavirus infections are the highest. In other regions, the curfew in place since mid-December will be maintained from 8 p.m.
Police in the Netherlands arrested at least 70 people on Monday after riots broke out across the country for a third night in a row. In Rotterdam, anti-lockdown demonstrators started fires and clashed with police in protest of a new nighttime curfew. There were similar scenes in Amsterdam, as well as the smaller centres of Haarlem-Gileen and Den Bosch. The 9 p.m. to 4:30 a.m. curfew came into force on Saturday evening to curb the spread of coronavirus. It's the country's first nationwide curfew since World War II. Many say it's not necessary as cases of COVID-19 are falling in the Netherlands, with the lowest number of new infections reported on Monday since December the 1st. But the government is worried about a highly contagious UK variant of the disease spreading. The unrest started over the weekend when protesters in several cities looted stores, started fires and clashed with law enforcement. In one case, knives were thrown at police and a COVID-19 testing station was burned down. The events resulted in 240 arrests and thousands of fines were handed out for defying the curfew.
I mean, you have our health director, Horacio Arruda, in the context of justifying the curfew, admitting publicly that there's no concrete scientific evidence to support the effectiveness of curfews to stop the spread of a virus. You have the health director, confirming that curfews really are more of a wartime measure to prevent riots, as opposed to a medical measure to prevent the spread of a virus. You have the same guy confirming that if people aren't meeting at night, they're going to meet during the day, so the virus is going to spread during the day if it's spread through that type of contact. Thus, totally undermining the absolute violation of some of the most basic rights, the right to walk outside, contradicting the scientific basis for that measure. And people are now filing suit and using those very words against the people imposing those measures. We're going to see what the courts are going to do. We're going to see what society is going to do.
Another night of unrest in Tunisia. Young protesters raging against unemployment, poverty and police brutality in some of the country's poorest neighborhoods. They say they have nothing left to lose. Even the threat of the coronavirus pandemic and a curfew aren't enough to keep them at home.
There is coronavirus, people are dying, and there is a curfew from 4 p.m. We don't care about coronavirus or other things. Feed us and find us work.
The government has deployed army across several cities. Hundreds of people have been arrested, mostly teenagers. The rights group Amnesty International has warned against the use of excessive force. For now, these protesters have vowed to stay on the streets, despite the army, the politicians, and the police.
The New York Post reports that German quarantine breakers will be held in refugee camps and detention centers. Gee, where have I seen this one before? Germans who repeatedly refuse to quarantine after being exposed to COVID-19 will be held in detention centers and even under police guard, according to reports. Officials in the state of Saxony, which is experiencing one of the worst outbreaks in the European nation, have already approved plans to hold quarantine breakers in a fenced-off section of a refugee camp. Another state, Brandenburg, also plans to use a section of a refugee camp. In Schleswig-Holstein, repeat offenders will be kept in a special area in a juvenile detention center, the report said. The state of Baden-Württemberg has 2 hospitals with rooms to hold the scofflaws, which will be guarded by police. The centers are aimed at detaining only those who continue to break lockdown, even after being fined, the report said.
The majority of the province seems to support the measures and the government. The government at the time. So
I think that will keep happening as long as people are terrified. As long as they live more in fear of the virus than they fear their own government, they'll go along with whatever the government does in the name of protecting them. You saw what they're proposing in New York. They're actually proposing detention camps. They're going to bring back Korematsu. They're going to bring back Jacobson and Buck by having forced vaccinations. And now they're going to bring back Korematsu and actually have detention camps for people. It's like, I mean, who would even think to propose that? First, I thought, okay, it had to be like a fake headline. Then I see, no, it's an actual New York State legislature proposing it. And then I see that it's actually become a proposed law. They're actually proposing a law to send people to detention camps on the name they have a virus.
Apparently, the Conservatives were floating the idea of using children to spy on their parents if the parents break lockdown, and getting the children to report to the government that their parents have broken lockdown. Orwellian. Actually something from 1984. It's actually evil. And then you've got the next thing, which is like there's a school in Oldham, Yew Tree Community School in Oldham, that wants to punish children who've been visiting other people outside their households, breaking the lockdown. And they want to eject these children from their online learning at school. It's like, my God, what an evil thing to do that would be.
And the thing is, having lived through this in real time, it's an amazing thing that you have witnessed, experienced, and felt the evolution of the whole situation. I have seen firsthand the evolution of a society. At the beginning, people were shocked at the videos coming out of China, and now people are, I would say, not necessarily praising, but accepting the slow chiseling away at what are the most core civil rights and liberties, the most fundamental, inalienable civil rights and liberties that a great many people in society have said they're not inalienable, they're not fundamental, and they're not core. And all it takes to willingly relinquish these rights to the government is a virus. And it's an amazing thing, you know, people say, yeah, I don't believe that that I have any sort of fundamental inalienable rights and freedoms. Under certain circumstances, any of my rights can be taken away. Well, that's a fine belief. The problem with that is that is not only true of them, that means that they don't believe that you have any fundamental rights or liberties. They don't believe that you have any right that cannot be taken away from you under the justifiable circumstances. Now, admittedly, there is a necessity for the cause, but at some point, if there are no fundamental rights of citizens, there are no fundamental rights of citizens. What more do you need? Then they're not rights. They are privileges bestowed by the government that can be removed at a whim. And a great many people seem to be totally okay with that and view it that way. Some don't. They're starting to question what's going on, how long this is going on for, the legitimacy of what is going on. It is interesting to see those who are, I don't want to say surrendering or abandoning, but it's interesting seeing those who are espousing the belief that neither they nor anyone else has any fundamental rights that cannot be removed at a whim by the government. And we've seen it. We've gone from 2-week lockdown to flatten the curve, and I remember walking the empty streets, taking pictures of, the rainbows in people's windows. It's going to be okay. I remember dog runs being locked off, playgrounds being shut down, streets being closed to vehicular traffic. And we were saying, okay, so it's only for 2 weeks. We can do this. We can all make a sacrifice for 2 weeks. We can all make this sacrifice for 2 weeks. And now, nearing a year later, we have basically been stripped and deprived of a lot of our most basic charter guaranteed rights. The right to peaceable assembly, the right to freedom of association, freedom of enjoyment of our own property.
In order to effect a timely halt to deteriorating conditions and to ensure the common good, a state of emergency is declared for these territories by decree of Lord Cutler Beckett, duly appointed representative of His Majesty the King. By decree, according to martial law, the following statutes are temporarily amended. Right to assembly, suspended. Right to habeas corpus, suspended. Right to legal counsel, suspended. Right to verdict by a jury of peers, suspended.
And the more it goes on, the more the violations keep coming. And some people are saying, no problem. People having their businesses shut down, being reduced to a government stipend, not for a couple weeks, not for a couple months, indefinitely. People having their lives destroyed.
And one of the most interesting things about this was this clip that we'll play now that just really highlights why lockdowns are such an evil thing.
Ada Jackson was 90 and had early signs of dementia, but families say she was happy, strong and feisty until COVID came into the care home where she lived.
It started to go from one person to 3 people to 5 people. You then started to just think, my goodness, they're not going to be able to stop this. They had the residents locked in their room. I felt helpless, that solitary confinement in the room. I wonder if Ada felt abandoned at that point in time.
Ada died on June the 3rd. She hadn't seen her family since March.
These are human beings. These are people with families. They have lives. They're not just numbers. This is a life that's gone, and the impact is huge.
Since March. So that woman spent nearly a year on her own, eventually catches COVID and dies.
How old was she again?
90. Is that the way that you want to go out? Is that the way that any 90-year-old wants to go out? Alone, for months and months and months, locked in a room on their own.
For months, most outside visitors have not been allowed inside senior care facilities, leaving those inside pretty much alone.
They're locked in their rooms with 3 times a day. They're getting food in a box. And that's it.
What do you think, Keiko? It's so cute. Yeah, cute.
When she first went into the hospital, and we knew that we weren't going to be able to visit her, it just really gave everyone a sense of hopelessness and helplessness, that we wouldn't have anything that we could do even if we wanted to hold her hand or to be with her.
She can't come over, right?
Rose, she can't come over, okay? So many people are watching their loved ones die. Our loved ones don't have the luxury of time.
There needs to be revision on the standards of visiting.
We have to do social distance. I'm sorry, Rose.
If it goes up and doesn't go over the top, then, you know, that's proof that the lockdown's working. But if it does anyway, then that's proof that we didn't lock down hard enough.
Yeah.
There's no real way to argue against it.
But the fact we're in our third lockdown implies that lockdowns are not a miracle cure for COVID. They are tremendously damaging in every other respect, though. The World Health Organization doesn't advocate for lockdowns. Right? This is the thing. We are currently operating against the best wishes and the advice of the World Health Organization. As they say, under what is the WHO's position on lockdowns as a way of fighting COVID-19, large-scale physical distancing measures and movement restrictions, often referred to as lockdowns, can slow COVID-19 transmission by limiting contact between people. However, these measures have a profound negative impact on individuals, communities, and societies by bringing social and economic life to a near stop. Such measures disproportionately affect disadvantaged groups, including people in poverty, migrants, internally displaced people and refugees, or those who live in overcrowded and under-resourced settings, dependent on daily labour for subsistence. The WHO recognises that at certain points some countries have had no choice but to issue stay-at-home measures, and they should make the best of their lockdown time. But they hope that the countries will use targeted interventions when and where needed, based on the local situation. They do not advocate for lockdowns. As they say, they have a massive and profound negative impact. And back in August 2020, we actually knew what this sort of impact was, because a report had been given to the government that had suggested that, in fact, there was something like for every 3 COVID deaths, there were 2 deaths caused by the lockdowns. I was like, okay, that's awful, isn't it? Right? These are what's called excess deaths, and this is just like these are not people who otherwise would have died. These are people who have died as a consequence of the lockdowns, and this is continuing on.
What's just interesting to see is the slow boil of the frog. People say, okay, 2 weeks is not that much. I can do it, and I think that's the right thing. Then people say, face masks. Okay, I think we can do that. I may not like it. I may have some problems with it under certain circumstances, but it's something we can agree to do. Then it becomes face masks are mandatory under severe penalty of law. Then it becomes public gatherings are mandatory are forbidden under severe penalties of law. Then it becomes you cannot have your own friends or family into your own private homes under severe penalty of law. Then it becomes you cannot leave your house after 8 o'clock at night under severe penalty of law. And some people are too far gone and they say, okay, I think it's like the gambler's paradox. They've lost too much money already. They can't sit there and pontificate over the money they've lost, the freedoms they've lost, and they just have to accept it and say, okay, well, what can I do now? Too far gone. And others are fighting back through the courts, and we're going to see if the courts are going to protect those civil rights and liberties. That's the update. We'll see where it goes. I'm excited to view this period of humanity in retrospect. Right now we're still living through it, and we're still seeing the push and pull of the various forces, unsure as to where exactly it's going to go. Take care of yourselves. Make sure everyone around you is doing okay. Talk to people. Don't lose hope, not in the sense of abandoning action. Use the resources that are available to avail yourself of your rights. Talk about it and spread the word.